Tim never thought the day would end this way. The argument had been escalating for weeks, building tension in the small house they shared. Every word felt like a knife, sharp and relentless. He had always been patient, always tried to stay calm, but something had changed tonight. Maybe it was the endless strain of living with someone he no longer recognized. Maybe it was the years of unspoken resentment. Whatever the reason, it ended badly. Too badly. Tim stood in the middle of the living room, staring down at the aftermath of what had just happened. The air in the room was thick, as if it had absorbed the weight of their last words. His hands trembled, his mind raced. He couldn't believe what had transpired, couldn't process how things had spiraled out of control so quickly. There had been shouting, accusations hurled at one another, and then silence. The kind of silence that filled every corner of the room, oppressive and suffocating. He looked down and saw the reality of the situation. He was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. All he knew was that life, as he had known it, was over. The night dragged on, time losing all meaning. Tim couldn't bring himself to leave the room. He felt trapped in the moment, as though moving would make it real, and he couldn't handle that. His thoughts were chaotic, flickering between panic and numbness. Every decision he had made in the past few hours led to this point. In the back of his mind, a small voice told him to do something, anything, to fix the situation. But there was no fixing this. He couldn't go back, couldn't undo what had been done. All he could do was try to clean up the mess that his life had become. His hands shook as he began to move, cleaning up the room as though that could erase what had just happened. But as the minutes passed, he realized there was no hiding from the truth. It was always there, in the back of his mind, growing heavier with each passing second. He tried to tell himself that it wasn't his fault, that he had no choice. But deep down, he knew better. The days that followed were a blur. Tim went through the motions of living, but he wasn't really there. He barely left the house, afraid that someone might notice something was off, that they might ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. Every sound in the house seemed louder, every creak of the floorboards sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. His paranoia grew with each passing day. Then, one night, a knock came at the door. It was late, too late for visitors, and the sound made his heart race. He hesitated before opening it, dread settling in his stomach. When he finally pulled the door open, his breath caught in his throat. There, on the porch, was a casket. Plain, simple, and utterly out of place. There was no note, no explanation. Just the casket, sitting there as though it had always been. Tim stood frozen, staring at the object in disbelief. Who would leave something like this on his doorstep? And why? The casket remained on his porch for days. Tim couldn't bring himself to touch it, let alone open it. He didn't know who had sent it or why, but the weight of its presence was unbearable. Every time he passed by the door, he felt it looming, like a shadow that refused to leave. Strange things began happening around the house. He started hearing whispers, soft and indistinct, but constant. At first, he told himself it was just his imagination, that the stress of the past few weeks was getting to him. But as the days went on, the whispers grew louder, more persistent. And then there were the shadows, quick glimpses out of the corner of his eye, always just beyond his field of vision. Every time he turned to look, they were gone, but he could feel them watching him. He knew he wasn't alone in the house anymore. One night, unable to sleep, Tim found himself standing at the door, staring at the casket. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and he could no longer ignore them. He didn't want to know what was inside, but something compelled him to open it. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside, there was nothing, just an empty space. For a moment, relief washed over him. But then he noticed something else. At the bottom of the casket, carved into the wood, were the words, "You can't bury the past." His heart pounded in his chest. Who had put this here? What did they know? The whispers grew louder, filling the room with their eerie presence. Tim slammed the lid shut and backed away, but the words were burned into his mind. The house became unbearable. Every corner felt like it was hiding something. Every shadow seemed to move when he wasn't looking. The whispers never stopped, following him wherever he went, growing louder at night. Sleep was impossible. He tried to leave the house once, thinking that maybe getting out would help clear his head. But as soon as he stepped outside, something stopped him. It wasn't a physical force, but a deep, instinctual fear. He couldn't leave, not yet. The casket remained on the porch, a constant reminder that he couldn't escape what he had done. Every time he looked at it, he felt a strange pull, as though it was waiting for him. He didn't know how much longer he could take it. One evening, after another sleepless night, Tim made a decision. He couldn't live like this anymore. He had to confront whatever was haunting him, had to face the truth of what had happened that night. Maybe then, the whispers would stop. He returned to the casket and opened it again. This time, something was different. A cold breeze seemed to emanate from inside, chilling him to the bone. And then, he heard a voice, clearer than before, unmistakable. "You can't hide from me." Tim stumbled back, heart pounding. He tried to tell himself it wasn't real, that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew the truth. The past wasn't done with him yet. As the days wore on, Tim's grip on reality began to slip. The house felt more like a prison with each passing day, the walls closing in around him. He no longer recognized himself in the mirror. His reflection looked like a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The whispers were louder now, constant, filling every room of the house. Sometimes, he could make out words, accusations, demands, threats. They spoke of the past, of things he had tried to forget. And always, they reminded him of the casket. "You can't bury the truth," they said, over and over again, until he thought he might go mad. He couldn't take it anymore. One night, in a fit of desperation, Tim went out to the garden. The place where he had tried to bury everything, to hide what had happened. The air was cold, the sky dark, but he barely noticed. His hands shook as he dug, clawing at the dirt, trying to unearth the secrets he had buried. But when he reached the spot, the ground was empty. There was nothing there. A chill ran down his spine. Had it all been in his mind? Was this all some kind of cruel trick? He looked around, searching for answers, but found only darkness. And then, the whispers returned, louder than ever before. They surrounded him, filled the air, pressing in on him from all sides. Tim stumbled back into the house, his heart racing. The whispers were everywhere now, louder than ever. He felt them closing in on him, suffocating him, drowning him in guilt and fear. And then, in the corner of the room, he saw her. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching him. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His past had finally caught up with him. The figure stepped forward, and Tim felt the weight of everything he had done crash down on him. There was no escaping the truth. "You can't bury the past," the figure whispered, and this time, Tim knew it was true.